The night greets us once more, my starling, though the hour feels changed somehow, older, as if the walls themselves have listened too closely to our tale. The candles burn lower now, their light trembling like frightened hearts upon the glass. The fire mutters softly, spent but unwilling to die, and the scent of wax and ash clings to every breath. You have stayed with me through the first horrors, and still you linger, brave soul that you are. The streets of London grow narrower in our minds, the fog thicker, the whispers louder. Each turn of the page feels like a footstep down a darker stair, leading where light dares not follow. Tonight, we return again to the string of pearls, where the barber's shadow stretches longer, and the secrets beneath Fleet Street begin to stir. Do not look away, my starling, not now. The blade has barely sung its first note, and already it craves another. Night, for most of London, is a shutting of eyes. For Johanna Oakley, it became the hour when eyes finally opened. She lay awake until her room forgot its shape, listening to her father's gentle snore through the wall, to a cart rattling far below, and to the barber's sign across the street that spoke to the wind in its old Creek tongue. Grief had been with her long enough to become furniture. Fear had taken rooms of its own. But something new arrived that night. Resolve, uninvited and absolute. If Mark Ingestry lived, she would find him. If he was dead, she would not let London bury the truth beneath pies and cheer. By candle's stub she gathered her disguise. Scissors, a boy's cap, a plain brown coat from a trunk of forgotten relatives, boots that remembered other feet. She plaited her hair close to her scalp and hid it beneath the cap. The coat flattened her figure. The boots added a man's awkward heaviness. In the mirror, the girl seemed gone, and in her place stood a page, lean and purposeful. "Very well," she murmured. "If London will not speak to Johanna, it will speak to a boy." She left a note for her father, "Do not fear, I do what must be done," and slipped into the stairwell before dawn. At that hour, London looked almost innocent. Fog lay like wool across the stones. The milkman's clink sounded hopeful. Even the Thames seemed to breathe instead of wheeze. She rented a crooked garret opposite the barber's, a house that leaned as though listening to secrets. From its window she could see Todd's door, the grimed panes, the pole that creaked like an anxious witness. She began her vigil. The notebook filled quickly. Comings and goings, faces of clerks, sailors and gentlemen. She marked how many entered and how few returned. She timed minutes, counted footfalls, learned the cough of Todd's hinge and the scrape of his chair. The alley behind the shop became part of her study. At odd hours, a cart appeared, barrels roped down, driver blank-faced. It rumbled toward Bell Yard and slid behind Mrs. Lovett's door, emerging later, lighter than before. In her mind, Johanna built a dumbwaiter that never ceased to climb and descend, bearing silence between barber and baker. She began to loathe the scent of pastry, as sailors hate a wind that has forgotten how to change. And she studied Sweeney Todd. He wasted nothing. He stood like furniture until he chose to move, and then moved like punctuation, swift, precise, final. At times he lifted his face toward her window, as if scenting rain. At others he returned from the alley wiping a dark fleck from his cuff with neatness that turned her stomach. Some customers did leave. A boy pink-cheeked and trembling, an old man muttering blessings through bitten tongue. But the sailors, those men of tar and far horizons, she never saw again. Colonel Geoffrey visited when duty allowed, his soldier's gravity softened by concern. She showed him her notebook, its columns of ticks and times. He frowned. Suspicion piled as high as St. Paul's, and yet the magistrates demand mortar. Johanna smiled faintly. If caution was king, she meant to be a Republican. On the third morning, she tested her disguise. The pie shop still slept, the lane slow with fog. She crossed and pushed at the barber's door. Inside the room pressed low with beams, corners clung to shadow, and the chair loomed like a throne awaiting confession. Razors gleamed in their box. Todd raised his head from polishing a blade. What have we here? A page? A message? She forced her voice rough. From Mr. Oakley, sir. His frames are ready. His eyes measured her face as though weighing its truth. Spectacles, he said softly. Some men see more clearly with them. Others only better understand what they would rather not. Tell him I thank him. She bobbed an awkward bow. His mouth thinned. And you, do you see well? Well enough to cross Fleet Street, she replied. Take care how you cross. Some stones remember those who slip. As she touched the latch, her gaze caught a seam in the boards by the chair, polished brighter than its neighbours, as if boots had taught it to shine. A trap. She forced herself out before her glance betrayed her. Back in her garret, she scrawled the word again and again until the paper nearly tore. Trap. By noon, Geoffrey had pulled enough strings to pluck a beetle from his comfortable orbit. The man arrived round with authority, moustaches ironed flat, hat brim levelled like a verdict. Joanna watched from the garret as he stepped into Todd's shop with a bureaucrat's tread, loud enough to be heard, soft enough to excuse retreat. 10 minutes later he reappeared, smoothing rain from his sleeve, as though that had been the purpose all along. He exchanged a few polite phrases with Geoffrey on the pavement. Joanna could read the Colonel's stiff jaw, even at a distance. Then went on, satisfied that razors were clean and towels folded, which to his mind covered the matter of conscience. Todd stood at his threshold with the same careful courtesy he bestowed on all things visible. He touched his brim to the beadle's retreating back, then closed the door. The pole creaked. Fleet Street resumed its favourite lie. Joanna shut her notebook. Then I will be my own beadle. She did not say it for bravado. The sentence arrived as calmly as a measurement. If the floor would not speak to official boots, it might confide in lighter feet. She waited for night to thicken, a patience measured not in minutes but in sounds. The pie shop bell dwindling, the last cart's clatter fading. Todd's strop falling silent. She wrapped her lantern in a rag, pocketed a hairpin, and slipped into the alley behind the barber's house, where the walls kept secrets and the stones remembered who had stepped badly. There it was, a modest wooden hatch set into the ground as if ashamed of itself, iron bands oiled out of pride rather than kindness. She knelt. The wood sweated, the iron chilled. She lit the lantern to a thin lick of flame and set its glow close without letting it gossip too loudly. The hairpin kissed the lock's tumblers, wavered, steadied. Then a small click, like a hush, granted. She lifted the hatch. Air rose to meet her, air that had forgotten sunlight and learned other things instead. It touched her face with damp fingers and an odour both stale and sweet, like bread remembered at the wrong time. A tight stair fell out of the earth, stone steps slick with the breath of buried walls. She lowered the light until the darkness drank it to a shallow pool. No sound at first, but the patient tick of moisture. Then scrape. It might have been stone against stone. It might have been a shoe. Johanna's heart reached for her throat and missed by little. She leaned in, listening as if hearing were a rope. The scrape came again, nearer, and with it a shift of weight that belonged to something that knew it had weight. She held the lantern still. The flame fluttered. Her eyes tried to make a world out of this narrow throat. 2 points of brightness floated up from the dark. Not reflections, no trick of lamp on wet stone, but eyes. Human in their shape, in their terrible patience. Wide, unblinking, fixed upon her as if she were a dream they could not afford to believe. They did not belong to a free man. They belonged to a person the earth had tried to fold away and failed to forget. Johanna's hand betrayed her. The lantern dipped, glass chimed. She snatched a breath. The breath came back as a sound too loud for such a narrow place. Her body chose for her. She slammed the hatch. Iron met wood with a clap that felt like a bell tolling the alley's small heaven. She twisted the pin until the tumblers protested and then resigned themselves. She stood, lantern wild in her grip, knees trying to forsake their obligations. London went on around her with scandalous indifference. A laugh from a doorway, a wheel on a loosened rim, rain beginning with the carefulness of a clerk counting coins. The night had the ordinary face of nights that do not expect to be asked difficult questions. Trap, whispered the word that had already been living inside her. Trap. And beneath it, either the proof she needed, or the mouth that would close over her name. She pressed her back to brick, until her breath learned a rhythm that did not shame her. The lantern flame steadied. The alley receded into its old shape. She slid along the wall and crossed the street like a person who had simply been late for something. In the garret, she wrote with a clarity that surprised her hand. Trapdoor behind house, stone stair, eyes below. She underlined eyes once, then again, and put her pen down because a third stroke would have torn the page. Colonel Geoffrey came when summoned, face pale under its soldier's polish. He read the 3 lines and looked up at her as if the paper had said more than ink can. God help us. God is busy, Johanna said, not unkindly. We will have to start without him. He wanted second inspections, proper warrants, the comfort of signatures. She did not argue. He was right in a way that often wins funerals. The beadle came again, poked, complimented cleanliness, departed with moustaches unruffled. Geoffrey returned with anger pinned so tightly it made ridges at the corners of his mouth. "A shop fit for a sermon," he said, "and the law will not preach against soap." "Then the law is not our pulpit," Johanna answered. "We must listen to the sellers." She expected his refusal and found only worry made articulate. "Not alone," he said. "Not again." "Not alone," she agreed aloud. In her chest, the word made no such promise. That evening, the sky remembered a quarrel and threw it at the city. Rain burned against glass. The barber's sign jerked at its chain until the wind learned manners. Storms are loud enough to lend courage. They drown the small betrayals a body makes when it is afraid. Johanna drew the page's cap low, wrapped the lantern, and crossed the street, a shadow among larger shadows. The back door's lock sulked, then conceded. The corridor smelled of soap, damp cloth, and something else learned from years of unconfessed work. The shop lay ahead, dim, orderly, empty. The chair waited at the centre, serene as a lie told often enough to become furniture. The seam she had seen from the threshold lay beside it like a spare mouth. She knelt, set the lantern low, and pressed her ear to the board. The thunder mumbled. The rain hissed. Beneath both, she thought she heard what her fear had promised. Space, not cellar. A place made to receive, not to store. She rose, studying the chair with a thief's patience. The polish of the arms, the hairline hinge, the footboard set a shade proud of the floor. She set her boot there. Nothing moved. But readiness can be felt like a confession. Lightning flicked its knife along the window. For the blink that followed, she saw a smear on the leather arm, where a man's hand would grip when he knew what was coming. Brown as old iron, unwilling to be entirely gone. Footsteps, measured, descending from the back. The storm paused to hear them. Johanna snuffed the light to a coal and slid behind the counter, pressed against shelves that smelled of shaving soap and cologne. Through the lattice work she saw the room in fragments, the chair's silhouette, the window's dull rectangle, the gleam of the razor box like a mouthful of teeth. The panel opened. Sweeney Todd stepped in with a lamp whose flame did not dare flutter. He stood motionless long enough to make motion feel like a sin. Then he crossed to the chair and laid a hand upon its back with absent fondness, as if comforting a dog that bites for him. "A busy night," he said to the room, almost tender. "The city will sleep well." A droplet Johanna had carried in on her sleeve chose that instant to fall from the counter's edge. Tick. Todd turned toward the sound with the lucidity of a creature bred to hear prey think. He came to the counter, the razor idling white at his side. His free hand rested on the wood above her head. She could see through the lattice, the small flecks in his fingers when the wind shouldered the window. He waited. She waited harder. After a length of time that altered the shape of seconds, he folded the blade, returned to the chair, and set his boot lightly on the engineered board. The floor whispered assent. He smiled with no indulgence in it, took up his lamp, and withdrew through the panel. The door shut, a soft sentence. Johanna did not move until her body insisted it was alive. She slipped out the way she had come, crossed the alley, climbed the stairs, and wrote with cramped fingers. Chair with spring, hinge, footboard, trigger, smear. Nearly found me. Then, like a vow written small so it looks modest, tomorrow, the trap again. Morning offered its usual deception, a sky thin as milk, a promise of clarity already betrayed by soot. Johanna woke with grit in her eyes and the phantom weight of the chair's polished arm beneath her palm. The page's cap lay folded on the table like an order waiting to be obeyed. Geoffrey arrived unshaven, lines carved deep by sleeplessness. "Your lamp burned until dawn," he said, trying for rebuke but unable to reach it. She told him everything: the trigger board, the hinge, the smear on the armrest, the trapdoor's breath of heat. His jaw clenched tighter with each detail. "There is a line," he said, "between courage and martyrdom." "Yes," she answered, "and London eats people on both sides of it." He promised he would not allow her to go down alone again. She nodded, but her heart wrote a different answer. All day the barber's arithmetic continued. One entered, sometimes one left, sometimes none. At noon the cart appeared, barrels trussed like guilty secrets. By 2 it re-emerged, lighter, as though a burden had been confessed. Bell Yard rang with laughter, but Joanna heard only its echo in her stomach. By evening, the air tasted of copper. She wrapped her lantern, slipped the pin into her pocket, and went out before Geoffrey could return with more warnings. The alley seemed to lean closer around her as she knelt at the hatch. The tumblers sighed, resigned, and the door yielded to her hand. Heat breathed up, steady as a great oven's patience. She descended, one hand brushing the wall for balance, the other cradling the lamp's shy flame. The stair twisted and gave way to a passage of brick newer than the house above. Grooves scored the floor, the memory of barrels. The air clung, sweet and foul at once. She moved toward a glow and the sound of voices. An iron grille cut into the wall offered a narrow slit. Joanna crouched, raised the lamp a fraction, and peered through. The sight struck like revelation. A long table sprawled beneath a row of ovens, their mouths red as wounds. Dough rose and fell under hands too weary to belong to bakers. Tin trays slid in solemn procession. The dumb waiter yawned, swallowed its freight, returned for more, tireless as a sin practiced daily. The boy was there, pale beneath flour. His small hands moved with the obedience of despair. Mrs. Lovett floated between ovens, gown tidy, expression calm, her voice slicing through the heat with its practiced mildness. "Mind the measure." 24 bychambers. Gentlemen who pretend to abstain will take seconds, and there, impossible not to see, stood Sweeney Todd. He carried a parcel under his arm, oilskin gleaming, and counted coins as though they were rosary beads. He spoke softly, and Lovett answered as if they had been conversing for centuries. Joanna's hand closed white on the grill. She told herself she had come for proof, yet proof now seemed like poison undeniable, inescapable. Her sleeve brushed the iron. It sang, faint but treacherous. The boy's head jerked up. His gaze darted to a lower hatch near the ovens, habit trained by fear, then drifted to the grill. His eyes widened. He saw her. She raised a finger to her lips. Please. He did not cry out. Instead, he stepped back from the dumbwaiter and put himself between it and the table, as if instinct knew which monsters bore watching. Mrs. Lovett turned. Her gaze followed his posture like water follows slope. She saw not Johanna, but the iron, where light had no right to be. Her face did not change. That was how Johanna knew. Todd, still at his coins, lifted his head when she spoke a single word too faint for Johanna's ear. He turned like a hound to a whistle. His eyes found the wall. He began to walk. Johanna withdrew, heart thrashing. She turned to retreat, but a door ahead opened with deliberate slowness. Light spilled through. A tall figure filled the gap, lamp steady. "Down here," said Todd, gentle as ever. "Why hurry?" The passage bent and the stair rose like salvation. Behind her, the measured cadence of his boots followed, unhurried, confident. He did not need to run. He had already learned how quickly fear will spend itself. She flung herself up the steps. The hatch resisted, weight pressing it closed. Her shoulder struck it, her hands shoved, but it would not yield. "Careful," Todd called from below, his voice a courteous warning. "It bites." Hands seized her wrist from above. "Up," hissed Geoffrey, half oath, half prayer. His grip dragged her through as she shoved from beneath. The hatch gave. Night air struck her face. Together they tumbled into the alley, slammed the wood, and forced the bolt home. Rain sheeted down, stitching the stones with light. For a moment, only their ragged breath existed. Then knock. Once. Polite, almost neighbourly. And Todd's voice came through the wood with perfect civility. "Good evening. Shall we talk?" Geoffrey's jaw set hard. He pulled her away from the hatch. They ran until Fleet Street's noise folded them back into its deceitful embrace. They did not stop until the garret door was bolted and a chair wedged beneath its handle. Only then did they allow breath to tear at their lungs. Rain drummed the roof. The barber's sign outside groaned like a guilty conscience. Joanna leaned against the table, her notebook open where she had left it. Tomorrow. The trap again stared back at her in her own hand. A prophecy she had already fulfilled. Her fingers shook as she dipped her pen. She wrote, "Chair with spring, trapdoor, passage to ovens, boy alive." Geoffrey read it twice, jaw hard. "We must put this before the magistrates." They cannot ignore ovens and passages, and a child enslaved. They can, Joanna replied, and they will, until it suits them not to. We cannot wait for their convenience. His eyes softened at her defiance, though worry deepened every line in his face. Then you mean to go back? I do. The boy will not survive on magistrates' schedules, nor will Mark, if he yet breathes. Geoffrey dragged a hand down his face. Then I'll be at your side. Better we fall together than apart. The storm growled beyond the panes, as if mocking their vow. Morning came pale, Fleet Street alive with pretended innocence. The pie shop bell laughed at hunger, the barber's pole turned, its spirals glistening red and white. Johanna stared from her window. Todd stood across the way in his doorway, posture correct, coat neat, face unreadable. His gaze lifted, direct, deliberate, and found her narrow garret. He inclined his head, courteous as a neighbour, as though acknowledging that the game was no longer played in secret. Then he shut the door with care. Johanna's heart hammered, but her resolve steadied. The duel had begun in earnest. Neither would now pretend otherwise. That evening, as twilight bruised the street, and Geoffrey sat sharpening arguments neither of them trusted, a knock came at Johanna's own chamber door. Not the trap below, not the alley. Her door. 3 deliberate taps. She and Geoffrey froze. The lamplight wavered. The knock came again, followed by a voice smooth as a razor and twice as cold. Good evening. Shall we talk?